Hello, wherever you are in this world. This is probably going to be an infrequent channel. Who knows, this might be the only recording I ever do on it, if nobody's interested or nobody cares. Just want to make it clear, I'm not a professional journalist. I'm just somebody who, probably like most of you, just looks at the world around us and forms our own opinions. Makes up our own minds on matters. You could probably tell by my accent that I'm an Irishman, but I've been living in the UK for quite a number of years now. I think when you get to middle age, you start to get a slightly different perspective. I was definitely somebody of liberal leanings in my younger days, and I'd like to still think that some of those principles I will stick to, and some of them I will certainly like to live by. However, I think you definitely get a little bit more open to other ideas, and maybe distinctions like left and right aren't quite as obvious or straightforward as perhaps you think when you're 16 years or 18 years of age. Anyway, what I wanted to talk a little bit about today was censorship. There seems to be a lot of it about. So I'm going to take a little diversion back in time for me. I'll talk about somebody that some people here maybe have never heard of or have some vague idea. Or if you're like me, over the age of 40, you probably fully know who I'm talking about. And that's Mrs. Mary Whitehouse. Now, Mary Whitehouse passed away in 2001. She was 91 years of age. She was the founder of the National Viewers and Listeners Association. So, very much a self-appointed person. Very, very strong moral convictions, which were very much informed by our own strong Christian beliefs. Now, personally, I couldn't stand her. She had a horrible, shrill voice. Eamon Dunphy, Irish broadcaster, I remember once describing her as a bully. And that's kind of how I feel about people like Mary, when they've come from a very strong opinion and seem to me, at least, to be very intolerant of any views that they feel differ from that. Having said that, there's definitely a school of thought that miss people like Mary Whitehouse. They feel somebody like her brings balance to a discussion. Extreme opinions can have their uses, particularly if you only hear one set of extreme opinions. Personally, I'm not so sure I agree with that, but that is my opinion on it. I think you find with a lot of people who have very strong views, when those views are contradicted or even refuted, they quite often don't have the capacity or any kind of willingness to move from that position. I grew up in Ireland right through the 80s, kind of came into adulthood in the 90s. So I would have seen a whole series of referenda, if that's the correct plural for referendum, around issues such as divorce, contraception, the right to life. There was another similar figure, at least I saw her as being a very similar figure to Mary Whitehouse in Ireland, called Alice Glenn. Alice Glenn was a member of Parliament, or a TD in Ireland, and she again had very, very conservative viewpoints, very traditional. One that particularly struck me, though, about Alice, and I think showed her in her true colours, was she was on the losing side on one of these referendums. I think it was probably the divorce one, but I could be wrong on that. She was asked a fairly straightforward question about how she felt that she was effectively on the losing side. And instead of, as you would expect from an elected representative, saying, well, It's the will of the people have spoken. We maybe have to look at what the majority believe. Oh, that wasn't how Alice reacted at all. She effectively just started to rant and rave, again sticking to her guns. To me, that's a profoundly undemocratic stance. You lost, Alice. Why don't you accept it with some degree of grace? I think sometimes situations like this can actually show a person's true colours. We all have our opinions, we all have our pet prejudices and things that we believe in. And sometimes these things get challenged. And it's how you react to that challenge and how you can take on board, how you can see the other side of the argument, even if you fundamentally disagree with it. That really shows what kind of person you are. So anyway, this was back in the alleged old dark days. As I said, growing up in Ireland in that era, it felt quite bleak in some ways. You had a combination of high unemployment, deep conservative thinking driven probably largely by the Catholic Church. So you definitely felt a sense that there was no progress. But this wasn't true. There was a rapid change, probably starting in the very early 90s and right up to today. And Ireland's a very different place. And so is Britain too. Which is probably why I personally find it quite shocking that censorship of this nature is rearing its ugly head again. But it's not being driven by these conservatives. It's not being driven by the religious right. It's being driven by people who would regard themselves as incredibly liberal. But it's still the same thing. It's still the same mindset. I don't know if it's some strange example of poacher become the gamekeeper, where I've now got the power and I'm going to get my own back and I'm going to censor all the stuff that you like. My own feeling is that it's just plain intolerance. It doesn't seem to matter which side of the political fence the person sits on. To me, it's a huge mistake to ignore the lessons of history. Using censorship as a tool doesn't work. It should never be allowed to work. We had it with book burnings and Orwellian thought crimes, new speech. All of these things are basically censorship. Trying to dress them up in new language doesn't change that fact. It's censorship. I know myself, when I was in school, they had the school debating team. It was a big thing in Irish schools, and I'm sure they had it over here as well, and probably in the States too. You were told how to argue, how to debate, and that's the way it has to be done. If somebody puts up a bad idea, you need to be able to challenge that idea, and you need to be able to say why your idea is better than theirs. Resorting to calling something bigotry, racism, or prejudice when you actually have very little evidence to support any of those facts is just designed to shut down argument. It's almost an admission that you don't have a valid point to make. I think what's remarkable actually is how similar the tactics employed by the likes of Mary Whitehouse and Alice Glenn are to her more progressive descendants. Bullying, name-calling, ignoring facts, ignoring democracy, and ignoring any kind of reasoned position. For me, this creates actually a big problem. It leads to a strong polarization of opinions. If you're going to call somebody who's not a racist, then somebody who actually is a racist is going to be treated much the same way. The problem, of course, being is that there are some horrible ideas out there. There are things that are really beyond the pale that do need to be tackled. But when you create this kind of division where there's only seen to be left and right and nothing in the middle, It just isn't true. Nearly everybody I personally know are a combination or a mix of ideas. People can be conservative on some issues, they can be very liberal on the others. And most people get and can understand without problem these contradictions, because they're not contradictions at all. Personally, I'm an unbeliever who actually think marriage is something that has a great value. It gives structure to families and gives role models to youngsters. I know there are some on the progressive side who think that marriage is an archaic institution. So anyway, enough of my rambling thoughts. As I'm sure you'll have guessed, I'm not a trained journalist. I'm only really saying things as I see them. It does mean I'll probably meander off topic every so often. But anyway, if you found this something interesting, if it's something you'd like to hear me talk about a bit more, then please do fill in the comments section and say what you like. I'm not going to censor you.